You're looking at a photograph taken in London on September 15th, 1901. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a typical Edwardian family portrait. A mother and her two children, frozen in the stiff poses so common at the time. But hidden within this image is something far more disturbing. Something that took nearly a century to uncover. Something that defies explanation to this very day. What you're about to hear might shake your understanding of photography, of time, and of reality itself. Because when experts finally analyzed this photograph in detail, they discovered something that simply should not exist. To understand why this image became one of the strangest mysteries in photographic history, we need to return to the year 1901. London was in transition. Queen Victoria had died that January after 63 years on the throne, and Edward VII had just assumed power. The city buzzed with change, electric trams replacing horses, underground rail expanding beneath the streets, and gaslight giving way to the glow of electricity. People believed they were living in an age of discovery. The telephone was only 25 years old. Edison's light bulb had transformed the night, and the Wright brothers were still 2 years away from taking flight. Photography itself was still young, expensive, complicated, and bound by chemical precision. Long exposures meant subjects had to remain perfectly still for several seconds, which is why smiles are so rare in photographs of the time. Glass plates coated in silver salts left no room for trickery. Each image was unique, burned into existence by light and chemistry. No negatives, no retouching. What the plate captured was truth, at least it was supposed to be. It was in this era that Margaret Whitmore, a 34-year-old widow, hired a photographer to capture a memory of her children. Her husband had died 2 years earlier in an industrial accident, and she clung fiercely to the small family she had left. Thomas, age 7, and Emily, age 5. The photographer was Henry Caldwell, a meticulous professional with more than 2 decades of experience. He kept detailed records of every session, time, weather, even notes on the behavior of his subjects. For the Whitmore portrait, he wrote, "Sunny afternoon, light wind from the southwest, 8-second exposure, cooperative family, no incidents." It was routine, or so it seemed. For nearly 90 years, the photograph lay forgotten in a drawer, passed from Margaret to her daughter Emily, who never married and lived until 1985. After her death, the family's belongings, including the photograph, were donated to the British Museum by a distant relative who had no idea what secrets it contained. In 1988, Jonathan Meyers, a veteran photograph restorer, began scanning the image for archival preservation. At first it seemed like routine work, but the more he studied it, the more unsettled he became. The first detail was subtle: shadows. According to Caldwell's notes, the sun that day was to the southwest. Shadows should fall uniformly, but in the image, some shadows defied that logic, as though cast by a second light source that shouldn't have been there. Then came the reflections. Margaret wore a silver brooch that should have reflected only sunlight. Instead, it captured something else, a rectangular shape, glowing faintly, with no explanation in the scene around it. Intrigued, Meyers spent weeks studying the photograph. He recreated lighting conditions, consulted Victorian photography manuals, compared it against hundreds of other images, but nothing accounted for the inconsistencies. And then he magnified the background. What he found was impossible. Half hidden in the shadow of a tree stood a figure. A human figure that, according to every record, should not have been there. Meyers knew this wasn't a case of faulty memory. Alongside the photo, he had discovered Margaret's diary. In an entry dated the day after the photograph, she wrote, "It was a very special day. I finally managed to photograph Thomas and Emily in the garden. Mr. Caldwell was very patient with the children. I remember every detail perfectly. We were alone, the children, myself, and Mr. Caldwell. No one else was there, not even the neighbors." Margaret, known for her meticulous notes, repeated this certainty in later entries. If someone else had been present, she would have written it down. But the figure in the photograph was undeniable, and it was no trick of the light. It wasn't a double exposure, the common photographic error of the era. This figure had solid form. It cast shadows, Its contours were sharp. It interacted with the scene's lighting in ways an illusion could not. Most disturbing of all, it was dressed in clothing that did not belong to 1901. Unable to dismiss the discovery, Meyers called in 3 specialists: Dr. Sarah Chen, an Oxford scholar of Victorian photography, Professor David Thornton, a physicist and optics expert who advised Scotland Yard, and Maria Santos, a forensic image analyst with Interpol. Over the following months, the photograph was subjected to test after test. The first began with Dr. Chen, who analyzed the very chemicals of the glass plate itself, searching for evidence of tampering or fraud. What she found would only deepen the mystery. Dr. Chen was the first to begin her work. Using spectroscopy, she analyzed the exact chemical compounds embedded in the glass plate, comparing them with other authenticated photographs from the same period and even from the same photographer. Nothing was out of place. Professor Thornton approached the problem differently. As a physicist, he examined the optical properties of the image. He mapped every shadow and reflection, created mathematical models of illumination, and even reconstructed the Whitmore garden in a 3-dimensional simulation based on the photograph's perspective. Maria Santos, the forensic specialist, applied modern tools to an analog problem. She examined grain patterns, optical density, and ran inconsistency detection algorithms normally used on suspected digital forgeries. Even under this scrutiny, nothing pointed to manipulation. 6 months later, their conclusions were unanimous and deeply disturbing. The photographic plate was authentic. The emulsion's chemistry matched perfectly with materials from 1901. There were no signs of tampering, no double exposures, no physical cut-and-paste montage, which would have left visible scars under magnification. This was not a trick. And yet the figure in the background displayed characteristics that were impossible for the time. When magnified to the limits of clarity, extraordinary details emerged. The clothing shimmered with a texture unknown in 1901. Dr. Chen, an expert in Victorian textiles, confirmed that it was not cotton, linen, wool, or silk, the only fabrics available at the time. Instead, it looked synthetic, decades ahead of rayon, nylon, or polyester. More shocking still, the figure clutched a rectangular object, something that reflected light in ways no material of 1901 could produce. Thornton subjected this detail to exhaustive spectral analysis. The reflections matched one modern material only: liquid crystal. Liquid crystals had been discovered in 1888, but remained nothing more than a scientific curiosity. Practical applications would not arrive until the 1960s. With the first LCD screens appearing in the 1970s. Yet here, in a photograph from 1901, was what looked unmistakably like a glowing liquid crystal display. An impossibility. As if someone had slipped a smartphone into a century where it did not belong, Jonathan Meyers meticulously documented everything. He photographed the anomalies under different lighting, created technical diagrams, compiled spectral data, and assembled a 200-page report. In October 1989, he published his findings in the Journal of Historical Photography under the title Temporal Anomalies in Analog Photography, the Whitmore Case. The response was immediate and explosive. Historians demanded access to the plate. Physicists argued in conferences. Skeptics offered rewards for anyone who could replicate the anomaly. Theories flooded in, each more unsettling than the last. The first came from Dr. Michael Hoffman, a Cambridge physicist specializing in relativity. He proposed what he called the Temporal Anomaly Theory, that the photograph captured a fold in time itself. Under rare electromagnetic and atmospheric conditions, Hoffman argued, the fabric of space-time could ripple, overlapping 2 different eras in the same physical space. It was improbable to the extreme, but he pointed to quantum experiments where causality seemed to bend. Could the Whitmore photograph be evidence of such a fracture? The second theory came from parapsychologist Dr. Elena Vasquez of the University of Edinburgh. She proposed the psychic projection theory. According to Vasquez, the figure might have been projected into the photograph by one of the children themselves, specifically Thomas Whitmore. Thomas had grown into a respected inventor, registering patents for electromagnetic devices from the 1920s through the 1950s. In his personal diaries, he described recurring dreams of future machines stretching back to childhood. Vasquez suggested Thomas's mind at age 7 could have unknowingly imprinted an image of the future onto the photographic emulsion. The third theory came from a consortium of skeptical physicists at MIT, led by Dr. Robert Mitchell. They proposed the quantum manipulation theory. In their view, exotic subatomic interactions between the emulsion's silver crystals, natural electromagnetic fields, and atmospheric conditions might have produced visual patterns. Patterns that human perception, primed for recognition, misinterpreted as a figure. In other words, chemical pareidolia. But this failed to explain why the illusion depicted not just a human shape, but one clad in futuristic fabrics and holding an impossible object. And then, years later, came the most unsettling revelation of all. In 2003, workers renovating the Whitmore house in Hampstead Heath found a sealed wooden chest hidden in the attic. Inside were letters written by Emily Whitmore, Margaret's daughter, between 1940 and 1945, during the Blitz. In one letter dated March 12, 1943, Emily, then 47, recalled the day of the photograph. She wrote, "The bombs fall on London every night now, and in moments of terror my mind always returns to that day in September 1901. I was only 5 years old, but I remember it as if it were yesterday. He was there, behind the great oak tree, watching us, a tall man in strange clothes that shimmered in the sun in ways I could not explain. But what haunted me most was the object in his hands. It was like a small rectangular window that gave off its own light. Emily had seen him. The figure wasn't an illusion. She remembered, and she had been told never to speak of it. Emily's letters described the figure in haunting detail. She wrote of a cold, bluish light radiating from the object he held, so unlike the warm, golden sunlight of that September afternoon. And when she dared to look closer, she saw moving images inside that glowing rectangle. Places she didn't recognize. People in strange clothes. Machines that floated through the air without wings. Emily had tried to whisper to her mother, but Margaret, intent on keeping Thomas still for the exposure, dismissed her. When Emily pressed, Margaret scolded her sharply. "Your imagination is working too hard again." But the most chilling part of the letter was at its end. Emily wrote, "The visitor knew I could see him. He smiled at me, a sad, gentle smile, and raised his hand in farewell. Then at the exact moment Mr. Caldwell pressed the shutter, he simply vanished, not by stepping away, not by hiding. He dissolved, like smoke in sunlight." For the rest of her life, Emily claimed to have occasional glimpses of similar figures, people dressed in fabrics that shimmered unnaturally, carrying impossible devices. She saw them in the reflection of shop windows, on train rides, even in the black waters of the Thames. Always fleeting, always disappearing when she tried to focus. Emily never married, never had children. She became a librarian at the British Museum, ironically, in the very building where the photograph would later be analyzed by Jonathan Meyers. She wrote that she had chosen that path because she felt she was keeping memories of time itself, hoping one day the archives would explain what haunted her childhood. But even decades later, new technology only deepened the mystery. In 2018, researchers at Stanford used AI algorithms designed to detect forgeries, tools meant to expose deepfakes on the photograph. The results were devastating to skeptics. Not only was there no sign of manipulation, but the patterns of light and shadow in the figure's region broke the known laws of optics. In 2019, CERN physicists examined the plate with advanced mass spectrometers. They discovered that the silver crystals in the figure's area had different isotopic ratios, as if they had been touched by radiation unknown in 1901, and in 2021, a joint team from NASA, ESA, and JAXA applied spectral techniques once reserved for analyzing distant exoplanets. What they found was almost unthinkable. Different parts of the photograph appeared to have been exposed at different times, different eras, layered together in a single frozen moment. The Whitmore photograph still sits today in the British Museum, locked in a special chamber reserved for documented historical anomalies. Thousands of visitors file past it each year, scientists, historians, skeptics, and believers. Many report strange sensations, déjà vu so strong it feels like memory, the prickling certainty of being watched, even brief visions of other times bleeding into the present. The museum keeps a visitor's ledger. Hundreds of entries describe the same experiences. Whispers, phantom figures, even glimpses of impossible futures. And the Whitmore descendants? Every year on September 15th, the anniversary of the photograph, they gather in that same garden at Hampstead Heath. For 8 seconds, the length of Caldwell's exposure, they stand in silence. Many claim that in those moments they too see him, the same mysterious figure, still waiting, still watching. So what was captured that day in 1901? A glitch in reality, a temporal window where the future bled into the past, proof of a multiverse brushing against our own, or perhaps a visitor, someone who never belonged to that time, yet was there nonetheless. The truth is this: the Whitmore photograph is not just a curiosity. It is a wound in time, a permanent record of something science cannot yet explain, and maybe it's not the only one. Across archives and museums lie hundreds of old photographs with impossible details. Figures who shouldn't be there, shadows that defy light, reflections of things that don't exist. Each discovery pushes us closer to the edge of an unthinkable possibility. That time may not be the straight line we believe it to be. If this story unsettled you, subscribe and join us every week as we uncover more mysteries buried in history. Photographs that should not exist, artifacts that defy chronology, and events that challenge the very laws of reality. And tell me in the comments, do you believe fragments of the future can bleed into the past? Or is there another explanation, one we've yet to imagine? Because perhaps, just perhaps, this story is only the beginning.